It also regulates the hemp program. It also, and this is what really made me want to run, not just the cannabis stuff, rural hospitals and rural economic development. Those programs have been rotting in the basement under the Republican administration. The incumbent's a guy named Sid Miller. He's from Stephenville. He's so bad that even the governor and Dan Patrick won't speak to him. I mean, that's how bad he is. And that brings me to one of the other reasons I ran for this office, corruption. That guy's consultant has been indicted for trying to sell hemp licenses that cost $100 for tens of thousands of dollars. It's wrong, it's immoral, but it also brings me to another kind of corruption that made me want to run. And that is the soft corruption of people holding public office just to further their own political careers and not care about the effects of their actions, not care about who they hurt with their actions, and not even care about who they kill with their actions. That's got to stop. Holding public office is public service. You're there to help all Texans. And we're seeing that kind of attitude of a governor, a lieutenant governor, an ag commissioner, a comptroller, who do not care if things even work. And we saw that with the big freeze. They don't care if the grid works, as long as they're getting contributions and as long as they keep climbing that political ladder. They do not care if our transportation system works. There's no world water plan for the state. And we're seeing that hit in the drought with ranchers in this area having to sell off their cattle and cotton farmers losing the value of their crops. So I ran for this office to raise hell, have a good time, kick those guys out of office, and turn Texas around to what it can be. Thank y'all very much, and I'm going to introduce a man that I was just so delighted to meet when I walked in the door, and I'm so glad he's here as a leader in this community. Dr. Taylor.
Today, some of our fellow citizens are calling for a civil war in this nation. The horrific experience of living through a civil war has not come to this nation in over a century. It is our hope and prayer that such a bloody conflict will never touch the soil of the American soul again. Many fly the American flag proudly in front of their homes and businesses, but privately plot and plan how they may shred to pieces the democracy which the American flag symbolizes. Some demand respect for the flag, but fail to respect the values the flag represents: one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We need leaders that will not call for arms, but will call for all fellow citizens to lock arms in peace in order to maintain civil tranquility in this country. God and not guns should be the ultimate source of our security. Let us remember the words of Abraham Lincoln when he said, "At what point then is the approach of danger to be expected?" I answer, if it ever reaches us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of freemen, we must live through all times or die by suicide. Let us not tire of asking the divine creator to place men and women of peace and high levels of leadership in our state and around the nation. We do not need bloodthirsty people in positions of power that use their influence to incite violence between neighbors. We need leaders that will not take power from the people, but will give power to the people, and who will keep the power on in Texas during major snowstorms. Our next governor needs to be a man who knows the legitimate needs of Texans. Our next governor needs to have looked into the eyes of Texans who lost their children in Uvalde and sought to give them hope beyond rhetoric. Our next governor needs to be someone who knows the terror of a mass shooting that took place in his own hometown when 23 innocent victims were killed at a local Walmart because of their race. Our next governor needs to be deep in the heart of Texas and not deep in the pockets of Texas billionaires. Our next governor needs to be someone who has sat with the common folk in their houses of worship and sat with them on their front porches in some of the poorest rural neighborhoods in Texas. And it is my belief that there is such a man that can fill such a tall order. It is the man I'm here to introduce to you today, and I'm honored to introduce to you Mr. Beto O'Rourke, our next governor of the great state of Texas.
Hey, Abilene! How's everybody doing? Good to be with you. Thank you for coming out. So honored to be back in this community, to once again be able to hear Dr. Taylor. Went to his church, heard him preach, was so inspired. This was more than a year ago. I was here not as a candidate. Some of you were with us. We had a great conversation about the future of our democracy and the need for each and every single one of us to make sure that we fight and secure the right to vote for each and every single one of us. And Dr. Taylor came out to that meeting one summer evening and said, "Why don't you join me in worship tomorrow at my church?" And I gladly took him up on the offer, was so inspired by the message that he gave to me, and I'm forever grateful that you would come here today to introduce me again to this community. So Dr. Taylor, thank you so much. Love hearing Susan Hayes talking about raising hell and having fun. Remember when politics was fun and we would gather together and we would do something and be part of something bigger and larger than ourselves, working to make sure that each and every single one of us could get ahead. We've got a candidate for Agricultural Commission who is joined by Janet Dudding, who's going to be your next comptroller, who want to make sure that we stand up for the little guy and the little gal against the big corporations, the special interests, and the billionaire donors across this state right now who control so much power and influence and determine the outcomes for far too many today. And then Elizabeth, And everyone, including you precinct chairs who are out there, you block walkers, the folks who have kept the faith over the years under some pretty intolerable conditions at times, to make sure that we finally come through for this state and this country. I want to thank you for organizing this, kicking this off, and bringing us back together again. And I want to start with some very big, very important news. The big stuff first. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to win this election on the night of November 8th. It's important that we all know that. I know we're going to win because you and I, we're together fighting for every woman to make her own decisions about her own body, her own health, and her own future right here in the state of Texas. We're going to win because we're going to make sure that every educator, every classroom teacher, every librarian, every counselor is treated with the respect and the dignity that they deserve. Finally, we're going to win because we're going to do the smart bipartisan thing, like expand Medicaid so you can see a doctor, take your child to a mental health care provider, fill that prescription. We're going to win because we're also going to make sure that the best jobs in America are created right here in Texas, and not just in the obvious places in Texas. We want to make sure that Taylor County gets its fair share, and that we make investments in this county to be able to attract the talent and the employers and the intellectual capital that makes this possible. Investing, for example, in broadband internet so that everyone can get online at the highest of speeds, finish their education, find that job, start that business, hire those employees, do whatever you set your heart to do. And I'll tell you this, and Elizabeth mentioned that I'm here with my wife Amy today. Back in El Paso, we are raising our 3 kids who just started their sophomore, freshman, and 6th grade years of school. We're so proud of them, so excited for them, but like you, we are well aware that 12 weeks and counting since those 19 children were slaughtered in that classroom in Uvalde, Texas, there are 2 heroic classroom teachers along with them. This state has yet to do a thing under Greg Abbott to make it less likely that any of our kids will meet the same fate. The reason that we're going to win is we're going to put our kids ahead of the interests of the NRA or the gun lobby or anybody else. We're going to make sure that we protect their lives, do the smart, common sense, bipartisan things to make sure that they come through at the end of the day. I can't think of anything more important. And that's why we're here today. This is why I think we're going to win. This is our 3rd visit to Abilene just since we started this campaign last November. And some cynically will say within our own party, hey Beto, why are you going to Abilene? You know that you can see Taylor County glowing red from outer space as you orbit the Earth. What's the use? And I say, you know what? I meet Elizabeth and I see the hard work that she's doing. Our first visit a year ago, these 3 beautiful kids, Siler, Mayor, and Alden show up and welcome us and say, hey Beto, you're in the right place. They're not old enough to vote. They don't get a voice in this election, but they're counting on us, and I want to make sure that we come through for them. There are people who are persecuted right here in Taylor County in their own country on account of the fact of who they love or how they pray or the country that they came from or whatever difference might exist between them and anyone else in this community, including the majority of this community. I'm here in Taylor County right now because I'm fighting for you in Taylor County. I will never stop fighting for you in Taylor County. Doesn't matter how you vote, whether you're Republican or a Democrat, whether you're 5 generations or you just got here 5 days ago, you're every bit as much an American, a Texan, and a human being. And I'm going to make sure that we treat each other that way going forward. Wouldn't that be nice? What if, to continue Dr. Taylor's comments, what if we had a governor who was not intent upon telling us who we're supposed to be afraid of or who we're supposed to hate, but instead was trying to bring us together to do the big things that I just talked about? Hold on for a second, because I'm going to lay a big one on you. This is controversial. It might even be radical. But what if we had a governor who brought us together to make sure that we fixed the grid so that the lights worked and the heat runs in the winter and the water doesn't freeze in your pipes? 7 people in Taylor County lost their lives last February because the people in power could not keep the power going to the people that they purport to serve. 7 people in this community who froze to death, who died of hypothermia in the energy capital of the world, in a country where it gets much colder in other states. And despite the abundance of energy that we have, the wealth as the 9th largest economy on the planet, it is a $2 trillion GDP. The fact that the governor was warned repeatedly on the eve of last February that we had underlying vulnerabilities and chose not to do a damn thing to make sure that we didn't pay the price, and some the ultimate price for that failure, and then pegged the price of electricity for 5 days at its maximum allowable rate, which meant that gas started trading at 200 times the going rate. Utilities went into bankruptcy. Others took billions of dollars in debt trying to keep their customers alive. Meanwhile, the CEOs of the pipeline companies and the energy traders made $11 billion in profit over the course of those 5 days. Ladies and gentlemen, that is by far the largest transfer of wealth in Texas history. Not only did so many people die, not only has he not fixed the grid, but he passed the buck on to you and on to me. Electricity bills on average have gone up $45 per month per ratepayer in the state of Texas. Instead of getting that money back from those energy traders and pipeline companies, he's asking you to foot the bill for something that you had nothing at all to do with. And in fact, you've already paid the price once. Those damaged pipes that burst after your house started to warm up, ruined your floorboards, mold started racing up your drywall and onto your ceiling. We took on literally tens of billions of dollars of property damage across the state of Texas. Now he's asking us to pay more. So here's another radical idea. What if we winterized and weatherized every part of the grid? What if we connected ERCOT, our grid, to the national grid so we could draw down power when we needed it, sell it back up when we have a surplus? What if that $11 billion, which was not only immorally gained from all of us, but was illegally taken? There's a state statute that says you cannot price gouge your fellow Texans in the time of a declared emergency or disaster. And specifically cited in the statute is gas and fuel. And that's exactly what they did to us. Now, why in the world would your governor not go after them and get that money back? It might have something to do with the fact that the largest donors to the Greg Abbott campaign are the very people who made this money. Literally, Kelsey Warren, CEO of one of these companies that made $2.4 billion over 5 days last February, slid $1 million check across the table to Greg Abbott for his campaign as soon as he was able to do it. Well, here's what I say. Damn the special interests. We're taking them to court. We're getting our $11 billion back, and we're returning it to you, reducing your utility bills and making it a little bit more affordable to live in the state of Texas. I mentioned teachers and treating them with respect and dignity. I think all of us here feel that. We'd have more people here, except for those educators now are in the classroom. And out of their own pocket, you all know this, right? Those retired educators can attest to this. You will pay for the classroom decorations that those kids will see. After that first week of that child who's on free and reduced breakfast and lunch, and you know damn well that she has no meal to go home to at the end of the day out of your own pocket, you pay for her to have some calories to burn while she does that homework that you assigned. It may even be that the kid who shows up in the same dirty pair of jeans, the same dirty t-shirt, same dirty socks, probably the same pair of dirty chones as well, that in order for him to hold his head high on Monday morning over the weekend, you purchased him a new set of clothes. The fact that in Taylor County, hold on to your horses, you are underpaid by $15,000 a year against the national average. That's just against average, not the highest paid teachers in America, just the average paid teacher in America. You're $15K down. No wonder over the course of this summer, you took on a second or a third job just to make ends meet. No wonder during the academic year, you'll also be tending bar or serving tables at a restaurant or working somewhere else in the private sector today. What if, when we say we're going to respect you, we really mean it? We put our money where our mouth is, and we raise teacher pay in Taylor County to get you up to the national average of $15,000 more per year. What if those retired teachers who have not seen a cost of living adjustment since the year of our Lord 2004 get a cost of living adjustment every single year going forward from now on so they can afford to be retired in the state of Texas? And what if we listen to those of you who are working in the classroom who said, listen, Beto, 2 years of pandemic, 2 years of learning loss, 2 years where these kids have suffered some pretty troubling trauma that the rest of us can only imagine what it would be like to be 9 or 10 years old and to lose your grandparent or both of them in the middle of a pandemic that's claimed 100,000 lives in the state of Texas. Your folks may have lost their jobs, you may have lost your home, you're bouncing from one place, one couch to another, and that teacher will say to me, Beto, right now, I'm literally just trying to keep these students alive. The last thing I need is another high-pressure, high-stakes test that in no way effectively measures the potential of that kid or the effort that I'm expending. What if we listened to those teachers, really respected them, and canceled the STAR test in the state of Texas and replaced it with something that actually works? Something that teachers are informing and telling us, listen, I don't fear accountability. I want to make sure I know how my kids are doing. I would love to do a better job for them. Let's just make sure that we have something that actually works at the end of the day. Best way that I can think to do that is by making sure that after we win this, and I serve as your governor, that we appoint a classroom teacher as the next TEA commissioner in the state of Texas. We're going to get that done. We talked about lowering the utility bills, fixing the grid. We got to do other things to bring down inflation in the state of Texas because under Greg Abbott, he's the single greatest driver of price increases in the state. It wasn't just the grid and what you're paying in utility bills. It is your property tax bill in Taylor County right now. On average in Texas, property taxes have gone up 40% since this guy took office. That is a $20 billion increase across the state of Texas. How can we bring that down? A couple of ideas. One, I mentioned expanding Medicaid earlier. Medicaid expansion, in terms that I can understand, is just getting $10 billion back every single year of our federal income taxes that we paid up to Washington, D.C. And lest you think that this is some Democratic Party plot, all 4 of our border states, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arkansas, and Louisiana, 3 under Republican governors, have all already taken the deal because it connects more people with care. It ensures that our rural communities are able to stand up and reopen closed hospitals and clinics. And because you are no longer on the line for indigent care, because that person who can't fill their prescription for insulin and has diabetes finally takes themselves to the hospital where the outcomes will not be as good as it would have been otherwise, and the care will be exponentially more expensive. Today, you pay for that in your property taxes. We expand Medicaid, you no longer do. And we can begin to bring those property taxes down. When we fund public ed from the state level, instead of forcing that on the backs of the local property taxpayer, we bring your property taxes down. When we do the right thing that Susan Hayes just talked about and legalize cannabis in the state of Texas, we bring property taxes down because right now, you and I are paying to incarcerate people for possession of a substance that is legal in almost every other state in the union. And although whether you're white, you're black, you're brown, Texans use marijuana at roughly the same rate. Overwhelmingly, if you are black or brown, you disproportionately pay the price of being stopped, of being frisked, of being incarcerated, of upon release having to check a box on every employment application form, making it harder for you to get that job. What if we said, look, we're going to stop spending $500 million a year to lock people up for this non-violent crime. We're going to gain another $500 million a year by taxing the controlled and regulated sale of this. And given who's disproportionately borne the burden of this failed war on drugs, we're going to expunge the arrest records for everyone who served time for possession of marijuana in the state of Texas. We're going to do the right thing, and good things will flow to the people of Texas. This is the choice that we have right now. Coming together to do big things that most of us, Republicans, Democrats, independents, can agree on. World-class schools, great jobs, the ability to see a doctor, getting right with our cannabis laws, making sure that women can make their own decisions about their own bodies, finding the common ground on protecting our kids in schools. Listen, on Second Amendment, because I know that's on the minds of a lot of us here and a lot of us beyond the walls of this room right now, we're Texans. We've got this, and let me explain. Like many of you, I grew up in this state. I'm fourth generation. Amy and I are raising the fifth generation. Growing up, I was taught how to use a firearm by my uncle, who was a sheriff's deputy, and his pride of his life was that he won the Sharpshooters Award from the El Paso County Sheriff's Department. So he insisted on teaching me and my sisters how to use that gun and the responsibility that came with owning it. It's something that Amy and I have passed on to our 3 kids. It's the story that most of you have in your lives. What we have in Texas today is not in keeping with that tradition. To have 5 of the worst mass shootings in U.S. history to have taken place in the last 5 years in this state, you either accept that we are inherently murderous and violent and like to kill each other in this way, or that there's something together that we can do to make it better. When you look at the fact that our governor ignored law enforcement, police officers, sheriff's deputies, said, hey governor, we got to do something about this violent crime. Our officers are literally on the front lines and are losing their lives at a frightening rate. You know what he did? He ignored them, turned his back on them. And he signed something into law last year called permitless carry. What this does, and this is after 23 people were slaughtered in El Paso, 8 in Midland, Odessa, the mass shootings in Sutherland Springs and Santa Fe High School. What this does is it replaces the license to carry program that we used to have here in Texas, which meant you want to carry a gun in public? Okay, we're fine with that. As long as you go through a background check, as long as you take some firearms training so that we know that you're proficient in this weapon that you'll be carrying around, and as long as we can do a basic vetting of your criminal background to make sure that you're not going to use that firearm against yourself or against anybody in your life or anybody in my life, for that matter. 38,000 times over the last 5 years, law enforcement deems somebody too dangerous to themselves or to us to carry that gun in public. 38,000 times they were able to stop something that could have led to the death of somebody in this community or across the state of Texas. Now, all 38,000 of those people, thanks to Greg Abbott, are free to carry those weapons on our streets. We're none the safer or the wiser for it. And tens of thousands more who never would have applied when we had a license to carry program are carrying those weapons today because they know there's no criminal background check for them to worry about. More cops have been gunned down in the state of Texas than any other union, and we have predictably seen a spike in gun violence. So what's the answer? How do we defend the Second Amendment and do a better job of protecting the lives of those in our lives? 3 ideas that I've heard from you as I've traveled the state. This does not come from me. This is not from the Democratic Party. This is from us, the people of Texas. Number 1, let's at least, at a minimum, raise the age of purchase for an AR-15 or an AK-47 from 18 to 21 years old, right? The Uvalde shooter was 18 years old when he walked into that gun store. Now, some amongst us will say, hey, Beto, criminals do not follow the law. Make all the laws that you want to, but they're going to get around them. Some will. Let's admit that. But the Uvalde shooter patiently waited till his 18th birthday. Didn't try to acquire that AR-15, those 2 AR-15s and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. At the age of 16 or 17, he turned 18, he was legal, went into that store and bought it. Raising the age to 21 would have at a minimum purchased 3 more years for some kind of intervention that would have stopped that slaughter that we saw 12 weeks ago in this very state. Another idea is something known as a red flag law. What that means is if you have that firearm in your house, but you're threatening to use it against yourself. You tell your boyfriend or a classmate, you know what, I'm going to kill myself. Or you say, I'm going to take this gun into my school and I'm going to go kill other people. Law enforcement with the red flag law now has the ability to intervene before it's too late. Why would this work? That shooter in Uvalde, before he ever walked into that classroom and killed those kids, his friends called him the school shooter. He was sending signals so strong, so obvious, that everyone around him knew what he was likely to do, and there was no legal recourse to intervene before it was too late. The 23 people killed in El Paso in 2019, that shooter ordered his AK-47. It comes in to his home in Allen, Texas. His mom picks up the phone. Allen Police Department, my son just ordered an AK-47. I have no idea what this kid wants with this weapon. She may have signaled some other signs of distress. The Allen police said, ma'am, I'm sorry, nothing we can do. Good luck, you're on your own. He drives that AK-47 650 miles to El Paso, Texas, posts a manifesto online before he walks in that Walmart saying, I have come to repel the Hispanic invasion of Texas that I have been warned about, and goes in and kills 23 people in a matter of minutes in a city that doesn't lose 20 people to murder over the course of a year. Yes, a red flag law would have saved those lives in our hometown. And last idea, if you buy a firearm from a federally licensed dealer, you'll go through a background check. And by and large, it works. But because we don't have a universal background check in the state of Texas, you can go buy that same firearm from a private seller, no questions asked. That's what happened in Midland and Odessa a month after the Walmart shooting in El Paso in 2019. Guy goes into a gun shop, tries to buy that AR-15, they won't sell it to him. He reaches out to a private seller, buys the exact same weapon, turns around and uses it on the people in his community, taking 8 lives in the process. Would a universal background check stop every instance of gun violence? No, of course it would not. But don't allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good. It would have stopped that shooting in Midland, Odessa, and countless others. Those 3 ideas, raising the minimum age, making sure that we have red flag laws, having a universal background check, gun owners, non-gun owners, Republicans, Democrats, independents, the people of Texas can get behind it. The one person standing in our way is Greg Abbott. And that's why we're going to replace him on the night of November 8th when we win this election. We're going to replace him and place our kids above any special interest or political consideration. We're going to make sure that we get this done. Last thing that I want to say before I turn the microphone over to you and have a chance to listen to what's on your mind. If you are interested in being part of this victory, of getting Texas back on the right track, then we want you on our team. When you came in, you should have been handed a piece of paper with a QR code. Cynthia's holding up an example of that right back here in the green shirt. You can scan that QR code and sign up to be a host. And when you sign up to be a host, you will be hosting a canvas where people knock on doors with you and meet the voters who are going to decide the outcome of this election. Is it easy? No. Is it comfortable in the middle of August in Abilene, Texas, when you're going to be sweating through your shirt, your shoes, your everything else? No. But if you want to win this election, there is no candidate strong enough. There's no political party with enough resources. There's no message, there's no television ad, there's no radio spot, there's no mailer that's going to get the job done. It's going to have to be people connecting with people. And I promise you, if you show up at someone's door, eyeball to eyeball, face to face, human being to human being, at this incredibly divided, polarized moment, at a time that far too many of us are consumed by our digital devices, you are going to break through with that vote. And the person who might have said, you know what, I'm really not sure what's going on in this election, the difference between these candidates, from your own heart, in your own words, you'll be able to share that with them. And as they raise their concerns and the opportunities they see in their lives, with your own ears, you'll be able to hear them. You'll make a connection and you'll be able to get that done. So please think about scanning that QR code or meeting one of our great volunteers who are here in the yellow vests. They'll sign you up in person as well. With that, Cynthia Cano is going to meet you wherever you are in this room with this microphone. All you got to do is raise your hand. She'll bring it over to you. We want to get as many voices into the conversation as possible. And again, a reminder, we want everyone here in this room, Republicans, Democrats, independents alike, all are welcomed into the conversation because it's going to be Republicans, independents, and Democrats alike who together right here in Taylor County are going to ensure that we win this election on the night of November 8th. All right, let's get after it. Let's do this. Ms. Kano, we'll turn to you.
To your left.
Here we go.
Hi, I was wondering your views or thoughts on the pipeline to prisons, basically the juvenile system that most children that are 90% of them there are either come from some kind of trauma. Actually, a family member of ours came from some kind of trauma or abuse, and now, sorry, he was 11, so it's really emotional. And we all know that 90% of them have some kind of issues, and then they end up in prison or messed up. And I know right now that the Department of Justice is investigating these facilities for abuse, neglect, suicide. But my great nephew was here in Taylor County as a 10-year-old locked up and suffered severe consequences. He's 12 now, and we can't fix him, like he's back in there. And even this, I'm sorry to call out Taylor County, but I reached out to the mayor, I reached out to the judge, and I got no response for them. And the mom has struggled with abuse with the father, but I offered to bring him into my home and they refused. But anyway, so and also just people in prison too, how they're suffering. So if we really care about life, all you pro-lifers out there, what about the lives that are here now? Like, we need to stand up for the lives.
Well said. Did you hear about the juvenile detention facility in Texas where kids are spending 23 hours a day locked up in isolation? Your great nephew was one of them. These are human beings. These are children. What is that going to do to that kid's head to be locked up in the same room 23 hours a day, day in and day out? Did you hear about the fact that since 2020, so this is a year and a half ago, 100 children have lost their lives in the custody and care of the state of Texas and our Child Protective Services, the most perversely ironic name in the world, right here in the state of Texas. Not for lack of resources, okay? 9th largest economy on the planet, $250 billion biannual budget in the state of Texas. We do not want for the money to be able to help these kids. It's just they're not a focus of our attention right now. We talked about, or you asked about a schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline. In the average kindergarten classroom in the state of Texas, tough thing for us to talk about, but if we don't confront this, we're never going to change it. Average kindergarten classroom, those kids are 5 years old, right? Most of them. They are 5 times as likely to be suspended or disciplined or expelled if they're black than if they are white. I used to hear about this schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline. I thought, well, it starts when you're in high school and maybe you experimented with drugs and there is a bias in enforcement and you got stopped and frisked and that's how you ended up there. No, ladies and gentlemen, it starts when you're 5 years old, as vulnerable as a human being can be, against a system that's going to make it almost impossible for some to be able to get ahead. So what are we going to do in a state that incarcerates more of its own people, including kids, than any other state in the Union? In a country that incarcerates more of its own people than any other country on the face of the planet. How are we going to make sure that the most vulnerable among us, our kids, are prioritized above everything else, including our political interests? And I love what you just said. If we care about life, if we care about heartbeats, let's make sure that we care about all life. Let's make sure that we care about all heartbeats. So, a couple of ideas, really quick. In that kindergarten classroom, you know, I talked about paying teachers more, doing away with the STAR test, treating educators with respect and dignity. Let's make sure that we're also hiring up more educators who look like the classrooms in front of them right now, right? I'd love to see more black men in the front of those kindergarten classrooms. I'd love to see more people of color given an opportunity to teach and lead in these schools, to be able to ensure that every child is treated equally in that classroom and under the law in this state. On CPS, Last time we were in Abilene, I met one of these heroic CPS caseworkers who said, hey Beto, haven't gotten a raise in a long time. It is really tough when I go back to the CPS offices and there are kids sleeping in the hallways, under the tables, on top of the desks. And I want to quit, but if I do, what's going to happen to those kids? So I stay on and I do my level best, even though I know, she told me, these children will emerge more damaged than when they went into the system. There are 32,000 of them, ladies and gentlemen, in this state. Ask the governor about it. You ask the governor about it, and he'll say, watch out for those transgender kids right over there. They're coming to get us. In fact, he says, I'm going to go after their parents for child abuse, and if that accusation is sustained, we'll be forced to take those kids from those loving parents and turn them over to, guess where? Child Protective Services in our foster care system right now. He is the master of distraction and inaction and chaos and cruelty and incompetence. And we've got to get back to doing right by and for everyone, especially these kids right now. So whether they're in CPS, whether they're still in the home, and they're struggling to get connected to care, the wait list, some of you saw this article over the weekend, the wait list to be able to get state-supported services in the state of Texas is up to 20 years long. You have a child who's medically complex, intellectual disabilities, you want some help from the state of Texas, you better get in line and you better be prepared to wait for 20 years to do it. Again, radical idea. What if we put the kids first in the state of Texas, prioritize them in our budgets and in our funding, our policies, make sure that every single one of them can get ahead, no matter who they are, where they are, and who their folks are. Ms. Connell, thank you.
Hello, Governor O'Rourke. Could you speak those things as if they were? I had a quick question. They just announced the utility CEO person over ERCOT. What are your thoughts on the fact that they don't even live here? They're going to be living in Ohio, or they at least live in Ohio.
We've got a real problem, whether it's on ERCOT or the Public Utility Commission, which just jacked the fees on your mobile phone bills by 24%. It is yet another Abbott tax. Your utility bills went up $45. Your property taxes have gone up $20 billion cumulatively. Your phone bill, the fee there, up 24% and counting right now. And we're putting someone in charge of ERCOT, which is responsible for managing our grid without any real public vetting or deliberation or transparency in the process. And with no plan to connect this grid to the national grid, no better prepared for this winter than we were last winter, and no plan to protect the consumer. Now, there's something that oversees ERCOT. It's called the Public Utility Commission. Greg Abbott has yet to appoint a customer or consumer advocate, a representative, someone like you or someone like me who's going to look out for our interests, our bills, and the reliability of the grid. This is insiders taking care of insiders. Greg Abbott catering to his donors and repeating the same thing going into this winter, where I really worry whether we're going to be able to count on the lights coming on, the heat running, or the water flowing. It's gotten so bad, many of you saw this, that ERCOT issued a conservation notice 2 times over the course of last month, meaning you needed to set your thermostat to 78 degrees. Toyota, the big Toyota factory in San Antonio that produced the Tundra that I drive around the state, they just canceled their 3rd shift because it's drawing down too much power from the grid right here in the state of Texas. We have an embarrassment of wealth when it comes to energy resources in Texas. It's oil, it's gas, it's wind right here, right outside of Abilene. It's geothermal, it's solar. Soon it will be hydrogen. Let's make sure that we have the competence and the leadership necessary to harness that so that this state can be moving in the right direction without question. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it. Thank you, Ms. Connor.
Hello, my name is Chris. I've been a driver for 16 years now. There have been 4 times as many deaths in vehicles than weapons, guns, not accounting for suicides, because suicides account for the majority of deaths from weapons. I was just wondering, do you think you can make up any kind of new rules to prevent bad drivers from being on the road? I don't know, a yearly upgraded test?
Thanks for asking this question. The gentleman brings up a really good point. This past year was the deadliest year on Texas highways since 1980. may have something to do that your governor, Greg Abbott, took almost every DPS trooper off of our highways and sent them down to be part of Operation Lone Star on the border. It cost you and me $5 to $6 billion to do that, to involuntarily activate 10,000 members of the Guard, many from this community who had a week to say goodbye to their kids, to their families, to their careers, for a one-year deployment, leaving our roads less safe than they are right now. So let's get those DPS troopers back on the highways, doing the job that I think most of them signed up to do in the first place. Let's look at the fact that there's $8 billion right now in the TxDOT bank account, in the coffers of this agency, that could be spent right here in Taylor County to improve road safety and conditions and make accidents less likely. We're moving in the wrong direction on almost every category right now in the state of Texas. It's another reason that we've got to have this change. Thanks for asking the question. Ms. Conley.
Hello, my name is Frida. Are there any changes that you plan on making for same-sex couple adoption? You have so many kids in CPS. My spouse and I have been married over 10 years, own a home here in Abilene. There's so many kids out there, and right now you can only adopt as an individual parent, not as a couple. What's going to change that to have parents adopting kids, not just an individual?
Great question. One of the things that I want you to take away from this conversation, I hope, is that right now in Greg Abbott's Texas, he's so intent upon making you afraid of people or hating people or dividing us based on our differences. It's really a Texas where it's you or me. It should be a Texas where it's you and me. It's all of us together. I just want you to be able to live to your highest potential, fulfill your promise. Whatever you were placed on this planet to do, I want to make sure that you do it right here in the state of Texas. But in our state today, though it's not okay, it's perfectly legal to fire somebody because they're gay. It is also not okay, but perfectly legal, to not hire somebody because of their sexual orientation. And to the question just asked, despite those 32,000 kids in the worst run foster care program in America, you can be too gay to be able to adopt them. It is legal to deny a same-sex couple the ability to adopt a child in the state of Texas. Not only must we ensure that we have laws that protect the rights of every single one of us to be free from discrimination on the basis of any difference, including sexual orientation, we also have to take this moment far more seriously than we have before. And I'll give you an example. Many in this room, myself included, I'm embarrassed to admit, had a hard time imagining that we would ever live in a Texas where abortion is outlawed with no exception for rape and no exception for incest. A state that made this legal in the first place with Sarah Weddington, the attorney from Abilene, Texas, who successfully pursued Roe versus Wade before the Supreme Court 50 years ago. It started right here in Abilene. But no victory is final. We must always keep up this fight. And we must be aware that if we fail to imagine that that could be our future, and we now find it to be our fate, then listen closely when Clarence Thomas, one of the Supreme Court justices, says, on the heels of Dobbs, he says, I promise you next is the right to contraception. Following that is same-sex intimacy, meaning that the sodomy laws in the state of Texas could be revived. And following that will be marriage equality in this state. So we've got to do all of this at once. We've got to defend against the bad stuff that's coming down the line. And we have to make sure that we are aggressively standing up for our fellow Texans, for their rights to be treated equally under the law. I'm so grateful that you're here, so proud of what you're doing. I want you to be able to adopt just as anybody else is able to adopt in the state of Texas. Thanks for asking the question. Gracias.
Okay, I have time for 2 more questions.
I was just curious about what your thoughts are on correctional officers in general, kind of on the same token as the Department of Justice, etc. My dad just retired, 25 plus years as a major. My fiance is going back and they are completely understaffed, 16 plus hours. I mean, I understand on both tokens as inmates, yes, a lot of the times they're not treated right. But so neither are the officers. I mean, staff assault on staff assault. There's so many things going wrong right now, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking this. I mentioned that facility where these kids are kept locked up 23 hours a day. I should have also mentioned many of these facilities in the state of Texas are not air conditioned. It's bad for those who are incarcerated. It's bad for those who are working to make sure that they protect the public and do their jobs to protect, against further crime or make sure that those folks are serving their sentences. Underpaid, understaffed, as you just said, also having a hard time with cost of living adjustment once they are retired. It's a wonder that we can attract anybody into the profession and keep them there in the first place. So making sure that whatever your form of public service, as a corrections officer, as a school teacher, as a CPS caseworker, as a sheriff's deputy, or a police officer, what you do is necessary for our success, our security, our safety in the state of Texas. We need to make sure that we allocate the resources and demonstrate the respect to guarantee that that can happen. And so I want to make sure that we have a chance to talk and to meet, to find out the specific solutions in this case that will bring that to pass. But you're right, we can do a far better job. We win this election and we'll be able to do that. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
So this is our last question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, we've lost children at our boarding facilities, and it's disgusting. What can you do when you're elected to help us find those children and prevent that from happening?
Family separation at the border?
Family separation at the border.
There's questions about family separation at the border. This state bore witness to a horrific tragedy of our own making. I mean, as Americans, right? As long as you buy the premise that we're a government of, by, and for the people, then any action by any person in any position of public trust is reflective of all of us, especially if we fail to change out those people who are in these positions. Kids in cages, children being torn from the arms of their parents, and now trying to reconnect these families today, and there's still hundreds who have yet to be reunited. I keep mentioning my wife, Amy. She and I were in El Paso, and we were there to witness a family reunification, one of these great Catholic charities that assisted in bringing these families together. And I don't remember if the girl was 8 or 9 years old, hadn't seen her mom in months. And you would think there would be a big smile on her face or tears of joy, but there was just a vacant expression because she'd been through so much pain, so much hurt. And she associated it with her mom, the woman who brought her on this 2,000-mile journey. And once they got to what they expected to be their refuge or their salvation, she was taken from that person, a stranger in a strange land, not speaking the language, not knowing when or if she'd ever see her mom again. I don't know what long-term damage we did to that kid and to other kids, but it's on us to be able to make it right. So I would argue that we have a vested interest, just from the moral imperative, but also just to make sure that we're living up to our values and our interests, that we reunite these kids. And we assist with the federal government, with local charities, whoever wants to be part of this to get that done. But if I could, one last thing on this. I mentioned that shooter who came to El Paso and killed those 23 people. He said he was here to repel that invasion of Hispanics who are coming to take over the state of Texas. This rhetoric that demagogues employ for as long as we fail to fix immigration in the state of Texas and across this country is just downright deadly. The 23 people paid for it with their lives. We lose thousands of people who try to cross into this country, very often for the privilege of working jobs that no one born here is going to work, or trying to connect with family again, or just seeking asylum because to take their kids back to where they came from might mean their certain death. You all read the story or saw the news reports about the more than 50 migrants found dead in the back of that trailer in San Antonio. For a second, try to imagine what would compel you to get into the back of that trailer. Where would you have to be in life? How dire would it have to be for you to willingly get into the back of this thing, crowded in with dozens of other people, to end up literally God only knows where? And now, think about you're in the trailer, you climbed up into it, somebody probably had to assist you, there's no step ladder, right? And you have to reach down and you have to grab the hand of your 11-year-old son and you have to bring him up into that trailer with you. Now, why would you do that? We have an 11-year-old son. The only reason we would get into that trailer with him is if it was the only way to be able to save his life. Here's what I argue we should be able to do, Republicans and Democrats alike and together. We should address the fact that there are people who want to come here to work and there's not a safe, legal, orderly path for them to be able to do. We have not updated our immigration laws since Ronald Reagan was the President of the United States of America. There are people who want to join family, and if they're coming from Mexico, the wait time might be 20 years in order to join them if they do this the legal way and get in the back of the line. There's no safe, legal, orderly way for them to do this quickly. There are people seeking refuge and asylum. The wait time to have your asylum request adjudicated in America today is 6 years. 6 years that you're with your kid in some refugee camp in Ciudad Juarez or Nuevo Laredo or Matamoros. 6 years where they could be kidnapped or taken from you or something else could happen. I understand, though I do not condone, why some people might try to cross before those 6 years are up. If we came up with Texas-based solutions to these three categories of people, that takes the vast majority of those coming into this country off the table. We'll have a safe, legal, orderly path for them. And the only ones left are those who seek to do us harm. Those who might want to traffic in illegal drugs like fentanyl. Those who might want to traffic in human beings. And yes, they are there. We should be aware of it. We should be vigilant against them. And we should be able to stop them. But today, they are the needle in the haystack. Tomorrow, after we win, and after we address this, and after we work together, we move the haystack off the table and we see them where they are for who they are. That's a Texas-based solution. And then you don't have people like Greg Abbott or Donald Trump vilifying immigrants and trying to make us scared of one another. And then last thing on this. What about those young people in our communities who were brought here at the age of 2 days or 3 years or 10 years old, whose parents left those countries maybe because this was the only place they could come to ensure they had a better lives for themselves, but also to produce a better life for all of us? What if Texas led the way in fully legalizing every dreamer who's in this state, making sure there is a path to citizenship so that they can live to their full potential and fulfill their promise? Thank you for this great question. Abilene, Taylor County, thank you for coming out. We're so grateful to be with you. We're looking forward to winning this race with you, for you, and by you. Thank you so much. Le agradezco. Muchísimas gracias.